The gunshot echoing across the plains made Tessa Fleming flinch as the stagecoach rattled to an abrupt halt. Her heart pounded against her ribs while dust swirled through the open window, coating her navy traveling dress. Wyoming Territory, 1878, not quite the welcoming she had envisioned when she'd agreed to marry a stranger 3,000 miles from Boston. "Roads washed out ahead, folks," the driver called down. "We'll be delayed in White Pine overnight." Tessa clutched the worn letter in her pocket, the correspondence from Mr. Harlan Blackwell that had promised her a comfortable life as his wife. The arrangement had seemed sensible enough when she'd been facing destitution after her father's death left nothing but debts. "White Pine?" asked an elderly woman across from Tessa. "Thought we were bound for Laramie." "Just a stop along the way, madam," the driver replied. "Small mining town. Got one decent hotel." When the coach finally rolled into White Pine, Tessa gazed upon a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings. Men in worn clothes and wide-brimmed hats paused to stare as the stagecoach passed. Women were scarce, making Tessa feel conspicuously out of place in her Eastern attire. The driver helped her down. "Hotel's just yonder, miss. You can wait there for tomorrow's coach." "Thank you," Tessa said, gathering her single trunk. "Could you direct me to the telegraph office first? I should inform Mr. Blackwell of the delay." The telegraph operator, a balding man with spectacles perched low on his nose, took her money with a frown. "Harlan Blackwell? Out at Raven Creek Ranch." "Yes, that's right. I'm to be his wife," Tessa explained, straightening her shoulders despite her nervousness. The operator's eyebrows shot up. "His wife? Well now." His voice trailed off as he turned away to send the message. Something in his manner made Tessa uneasy. "Is there something I should know about Mr. Blackwell?" "Not my place to say, miss." He handed back her change. "Message sent. Good luck to you." The hotel was plain but clean. Tessa paid for her room and was headed up the stairs when she heard raised voices from the saloon portion of the building. "Blackwell's done it again. Ordered himself another bride." A gruff laugh followed. "Wonder how long this one lasts before she runs off crying like the last two." Tessa froze, her trunk suddenly feeling twice as heavy. "Man's got no right treating women that way," came another voice, softer but firm. "Working them like slaves and expecting them to be grateful. What you gonna do about it, Matthews? Ain't your business." "Maybe it should be somebody's business." Tessa couldn't help herself. She set down her trunk and peered around the corner into the saloon. A tall man with broad shoulders stood with his back to her, facing down three others at the bar. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and even from behind, she could see the tension in his stance. "You're too soft, Matthews," one of the men sneered. "That's why your ranch is barely scraping by while Blackwell's got the best land in the county." "I'd rather scrape by honest than prosper on cruelty," the tall man replied evenly. "And my name's Marshall, not Matthews. 3 years in this town, and you still can't get it right, Dobbs." Marshall. The name settled in Tessa's mind as she quietly retreated, picking up her trunk again. She needed to think. In her room, Tessa unpacked only what she needed for the night. The conversation downstairs troubled her deeply. Had she made a terrible mistake? Her entire future depended on this marriage. She had no money to return east, and no prospects awaiting her there even if she could. A soft knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, a young woman with kind eyes stood holding a tray. "Evenin', miss. Thought you might want some supper since you didn't come down." "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Tessa accepted the tray. "I'm Tessa Fleming. Sarah Wilkins. I help run the hotel with my pa." She hesitated. "Heard you're headed to Raven Creek Ranch." Tessa nodded slowly. "I'm to marry Mr. Blackwell." Sarah's smile faltered. "Miss Fleming, there's things you should know. Mr. Blackwell, I overheard some men in the saloon," Tessa admitted. "They mentioned other brides who left." Sarah nodded grimly. "2 of them. Lucy made it 3 weeks before she fled in the night. Emma lasted almost 2 months. Mr. Blackwell works his ranch hands from dawn past dusk and expects no less from a wife. I'm not afraid of hard work, Tessa said, though her voice wavered. It ain't just the work. It's the man. Sarah lowered her voice. Cold as ice, they say. Never a kind word. Locks up the house when he's gone and counts every grain of sugar. Tessa sank onto the bed. I've committed to this arrangement. I have nowhere else to go. There's always choices, Sarah said gently. White Pine needs a schoolteacher, something fierce. Children are running wild with no learning. She watched from the edge of the window as he mounted his horse and rode slowly out of town. Morning brought no clarity. Tessa dressed carefully, hoping to make a good impression despite her misgivings. The stagecoach wouldn't depart until noon, giving her time to explore White Pine. Perhaps she could inquire about the teaching position just in case. The general store was her first stop. As she examined a display of sturdy work gloves, the bell above the door jingled. Need some rope, Tom? The good kind, said a deep voice that Tessa instantly recognized from the saloon. She turned and found herself face to face with Marshall. Up close, she noticed his eyes were a warm hazel, crinkling at the corners as recognition dawned. You're the lady from the stagecoach, he said, tipping his hat politely. Marshall Young, miss. I have a small spread just outside town. Tessa Fleming. She offered her hand, which he shook with surprising gentleness for such large hands. I'm traveling to Raven Creek Ranch. His expression shifted subtly. I see. You know Mr. Blackwell, she said. It wasn't a question. Marshall nodded slowly. I do. Most folks around here do. I overheard you in the saloon last night, Tessa admitted. You don't think highly of him. A muscle tightened in Marshall's jaw. Not my place to speak ill of another man. Please, Tessa urged. I need to know what I'm walking into. Marshall glanced around the store, then gestured toward the door. Would you walk with me, Miss Fleming? Some conversations are better had in the open air. They strolled slowly down the boardwalk, Tessa acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. Harlan Blackwell is a hard man, Marshall said finally. Built his ranch from nothing, which folks respect. But he treats his animals better than his people, and that's the truth. And the other brides? Tessa asked. Came with hope same as yours, I imagine. Left broken. Marshall's voice was gentle, but his words landed like stones. Miss Lucy, she showed up at my door one night last winter, half frozen. Said she'd rather die in the snow than spend another day with him. Tessa stopped walking, her heart hammering. What did you do? Got her to safety, then to the train east. He shrugged. Wasn't much, but it was right. Why are you telling me this? You don't know me. Marshall looked at her directly, his gaze honest and clear. Because everyone deserves fair warning before they make a choice that's hard to unmake. Before Tessa could respond, a commotion drew their attention to the far end of the street. A wagon was pulling up, driven by a severe-looking man with iron gray hair and a meticulously trimmed beard. That's him, Marshall said quietly. Looks like he got your telegram. Harlan Blackwell climbed down from his wagon with deliberate movements. Everything about him was precise, from his spotless boots to his cold, assessing gaze that swept the street until it landed on Tessa. His expression didn't change as he approached. Miss Fleming. His voice matched his appearance, rigid and controlled. Tessa nodded, suddenly unable to speak. I received word of your arrival. I was not expecting you for another 3 days. He looked her over critically. You're smaller than I anticipated. Farm work requires strength. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Blackwell, Tessa managed to say. We shall see. Gather your belongings. I won't waste daylight waiting. Marshall stepped forward slightly. Mr. Blackwell, good day to you. Perhaps Miss Fleming might appreciate a meal before the journey to your ranch. The ride's a long one. Blackwell's eyes narrowed.
Young.
Still interfering in others' affairs, I see. Just being neighborly, Marshall replied evenly. Miss Fleming is my concern now, not yours. Blackwell turned to Tessa. 10 minutes to collect your things. The wagon's out front. As he strode away, Tessa felt as though all the air had been pressed from her lungs. I know you're smart, questioning things instead of just accepting them. Those are rare qualities worth protecting. A warmth spread through Tessa's chest at his words. No one had ever spoken to her with such genuine respect. I need to think, she said finally. Not much time for thinking, Marshall replied. But whatever you decide, you're not alone here. Tessa hurried back to the hotel, her mind racing. Sarah met her on the stairs. He's here for you already?
Yes.
I don't know what to do. Sarah squeezed her arm. Trust your instincts. They'll serve you better than any contract. In her room, Tessa moved mechanically, packing her belongings. The practical part of her mind argued that she should honor her agreement with Blackwell. He had, after all, paid good money to bring her west. The marriage might not be warm, but it would be secure. Yet Marshall's words echoed in her thoughts. You're not alone here. Could she truly build a different life than the one she'd planned? When she descended the stairs with her trunk, both Blackwell and Marshall were waiting in the hotel lobby. The tension between the two men was palpable. You'll find, Miss Fleming, that things operate differently in Wyoming than in Boston. Marshall took a step forward. That's not how contracts work, Blackwell. Not even out here. Stay out of this, young. Blackwell's hand moved slightly toward his coat, where Tessa suspected a weapon might be concealed. Mr. Blackwell, Tessa said firmly, drawing his attention back to her. I fulfilled my part of our arrangement by traveling here at considerable personal risk. If you intend to alter the terms, then I must consider our agreement void. Blackwell's eyes narrowed dangerously. You have nowhere to go, girl. No money. No connections. You'll come to my ranch and be grateful for the opportunity. Actually, Sarah interjected, stepping forward from behind the desk, the town council met this morning. They're prepared to offer Miss Fleming the position of schoolteacher, with room and board included. Tessa blinked in surprise. This morning? How? Word travels fast in small towns, Marshall said with a slight smile. Blackwell's face darkened. This is your doing, young. Always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. The council's been trying to hire a teacher for months, Marshall replied calmly. Miss Fleming is qualified and available. It's fortunate timing for White Pine. She's contracted to me, Blackwell insisted. A contract you just admitted you won't honor as written, Tessa pointed out, newfound courage strengthening her voice. Mr. Blackwell, I release you from any obligation to me, and I release myself from any obligation to you. For a moment, Tessa thought Blackwell might strike her. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. A fresh start, Marshall said. The schoolhouse needs some work, but the children are eager to learn. You seem very informed about the situation, Tessa observed, giving him a questioning look. Marshall had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have suggested your qualifications to the council first thing this morning, before you even knew if I wanted to stay. I figured you deserved options. He shrugged. The choice was always going to be yours. That simple statement respecting her agency in a way few men ever had warmed Tessa more than any declaration could have. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. The schoolhouse, a small building that had stood empty for nearly a year, needed considerable cleaning and repairs. To Tessa's surprise, Marshall appeared daily after tending to his own ranch, spending hours fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, and building sturdy desks. You don't have to do all this, Tessa told him one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and pink. I know, he replied simply. I want to. She learned about his ranch smaller than Blackwell's, but lovingly tended. How he'd come west after the war with nothing but determination and a knack for understanding horses. How he'd built his modest home with his own hands, adding a room each year as he could afford the lumber. "It's not much," he admitted one evening, "but there's good water, good grazing, and room to grow." "It sounds wonderful," Tessa said sincerely. "A place built with care rather than conquest." He looked at her then, something unspoken passing between them. "Exactly." As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light, Tessa found herself deeply woven into the fabric of white pine. Parents invited her to Sunday dinners. Children brought her wildflowers and interesting rocks. Even the gruff men from the saloon tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. But Harlan Blackwell remained a shadow at the edges of her newfound happiness. Rumors circulated that he was furious about Tessa's rejection, blaming Marshall for interfering. Twice, ranch hands from Raven Creek had started trouble in town, though nothing direct. "He's waiting for something," Marshall said one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. "Men like Blackwell don't forgive what they see as disrespect." "I can't live in fear of him," Tessa replied. "I won't." Marshall reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. Brave as always. The touch sent warmth spreading up Tessa's arm. Over the weeks, they'd grown closer, their friendship deepening into something neither had put into words yet. But Tessa felt it in every look, every conversation, every moment of comfortable silence between them. He reached up, his fingers hovering near her cheek as though asking permission. When she nodded slightly, he brushed a strand of hair from her face with exquisite tenderness. "Tessa Fleming, I'm falling in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't have much to offer except a life built day by day, with honesty and care." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. "That's everything worth having." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative then deepening as they both realized the depth of their feelings. When they finally parted, Marshall rested his forehead against hers. "I should court you properly," he murmured. "Take time to," Tessa laughed softly. "We've spent nearly every day together for weeks, Marshall. I think we're well past the initial courtship stage." His smile was radiant.
"Still,
some things shouldn't be rushed." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the moment. They turned to see a rider approaching at speed. Tom from the general store, his face grim. "Marshall, there's trouble. Blackwell's men are at your ranch. They're saying your fence cuts across their grazing rights." Marshall's expression hardened. "And if trouble starts, run for those trees." "I won't leave you," Tessa replied. They rode down to the yard, stopping several yards from Blackwell and his men. Two of them held burning torches, their flames flickering menacingly in the gathering dusk. "Cutting across my land, young?" Blackwell called out. "That's a mistake you can't afford to make." "My boundary's where it's always been," Marshall replied evenly. "Registered at the land office in Cheyenne. You know that as well as I do." Blackwell's cold eyes moved to Tessa. "I see you've taken what's mine in more ways than one." "Because you understand force but not decency?" Blackwell's expression darkened. He gestured to his men. "Burn the barn. Let's see how many horses he can manage without shelter come winter." Two men dismounted, moving toward the barn with their torches. Marshall's hand moved toward his gun. "Wait!" Tessa cried out, surprising everyone. She slid from the horse despite Marshall's attempt to stop her. "Mr. Blackwell, there's a smarter way to resolve this." "Tessa, don't," Marshall warned. But she stepped forward, her heart pounding yet her mind clear. "You're a businessman, Mr. Blackwell. What profit is there in destroying property? It won't change the boundary line." Blackwell studied her with cold calculation.
what do you propose?"
"The land office reopens in 3 days. We can all ride to Cheyenne, review the official boundaries, and settle this legally." And why would I wait? I have the advantage now. Tessa gestured around them.
Do you?
There are witnesses to your threats. Arson is a hanging offense, even in Wyoming Territory. Is a boundary dispute worth risking your men's lives? One of Blackwell's ranch hands shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Boss, maybe she's got a point. Sheriff Jenkins ain't one to look kindly on burning a man's property. A tense silence followed as Blackwell considered. Finally, he raised a hand, signaling his men to lower their torches. 3 days, he said coldly. We ride to Cheyenne. If the boundaries favor me, young, I'll take more than just the disputed pasture as compensation. And if they favor Marshall?
Tessa pressed.
Blackwell's eyes narrowed. Then he keeps his worthless patch of dirt. And you leave us both in peace, Tessa added firmly. No more threats. No more intimidation. Bold demands from someone in no position to make them, Blackwell replied. Those are my terms, Tessa insisted. Otherwise, we can settle this right now with the sheriff present. Something like grudging respect flickered in Blackwell's eyes. 3 days, he repeated, before turning his horse. Don't disappoint me in Cheyenne. As Blackwell and his men rode away, Marshall dismounted quickly, pulling Tessa into his arms. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Perhaps both, Tessa admitted, her bravado fading as she began to tremble with the aftermath of fear. But it bought us time. Marshall cupped her face gently. You stood up to the most feared man in the county, without flinching. I had something worth fighting for. She looked up at him, then around at the small ranch that already felt more like home than anywhere she'd been. Someone worth fighting for. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Marshall gathered his land deeds and boundary markers. Tom and several other townspeople offered to ride with them to Cheyenne as witnesses. The night before their departure, Marshall and Tessa sat on his porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Whatever happens tomorrow, Marshall said quietly, I want you to know that meeting you has been the greatest gift of my life. Tessa turned to him. Nothing that happens tomorrow will change us, Marshall. Not Blackwell, not boundary lines, nothing. I was thinking, he said hesitantly, that life's too uncertain to waste time on long courtships when you know what's right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. Tessa's breath caught. Are you asking? I'm asking if you'll marry me, Tessa Fleming. Not because of contracts or convenience, but because I love you with everything I am. Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks as she nodded.
Yes.
1,000 times yes. The journey to Cheyenne the next day was surprisingly peaceful. Blackwell and his men kept their distance, riding several hundred yards ahead. At the land office, the records were clear. Marshall's boundary markers were correctly placed. Blackwell had no claim to the disputed land. The land agent, a bespectacled man with an impressive mustache, was definitive. The boundaries were established 5 years ago, Mr. Blackwell. Mr. Young's fence line follows the legal division precisely. Blackwell's face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with cold fury. As agreed, Tessa said firmly, this matter is now resolved. Permanently. For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might refuse to honor their agreement. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a harsh sound with no warmth behind it. You've found yourself a formidable woman, Young. He nodded curtly. Keep your miserable plot. It's hardly worth my time. Blackwell stalked from the office without another word. His men followed, leaving an uncertain silence behind them. Do you think he'll honor the agreement? Tessa asked as they rode homeward. Marshall considered carefully. Men like Blackwell respect power above all else. You showed him you weren't powerless. That might be enough. 2 weeks later, Tessa and Marshall were married in White Pine's small church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the school children throwing flower petals as the newlyweds emerged. Sarah, who had become Tessa's close friend, hugged her tightly. "I knew that first day you were meant for better things than Raven Creek Ranch." "I found something I never expected to find," Tessa admitted, watching Marshall as he accepted congratulations from the townsmen. "Not just love, but purpose. Community. And what about teaching now that you're a rancher's wife?" Tessa smiled. "Marshall and I agreed I'll continue teaching. The ranch is close enough that I can manage both." As the celebration continued into the evening, with fiddle music and dancing in the town square, Marshall pulled Tessa aside for a moment of quiet. "Happy, Mrs. Young?" he asked, his eyes warm in the lamplight. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied honestly. "I came west to marry a stranger for security. Instead, I found a home, work that matters, and a man who sees me as a partner rather than a possession." "Partners," Marshall agreed, taking her hand. "Building something together, day by day." Over the following years, White Pine flourished. The school expanded as more families settled in the area. Marshall's ranch prospered through careful management and his renowned way with horses. Tessa continued teaching while helping with the ranch, finding a balance that honored both their needs. Harlan Blackwell kept his distance, though rumors occasionally reached them of his continuing harsh treatment of workers and livestock alike. 2 years after Tessa and Marshall's wedding, news came that Blackwell had suffered a stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed. His vast holdings were gradually sold off, his influence diminishing. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their 3-year-old son Thomas playing with his baby brother Michael in the yard, Tessa reflected on how differently her life might have turned out. "Do you ever think about that day when we faced Blackwell?" she asked Marshall. He nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I think about how you stood your ground when most men would have backed down." "I was terrified," Tessa admitted. "But sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear." Marshall smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That's why I fell in love with you, Tessa Young. Your heart is as brave as it is kind." "We built something beautiful here," she said, looking out over their land, the expanded house, the thriving garden, the healthy horses in the corral. "And we're just getting started," Marshall promised. As the sunset painted the Wyoming sky in brilliant colors, Tessa leaned against the man who had shown her that true strength lay not in harshness, but in kindness. She had traveled west seeking security and found something far more precious, a life built on love, respect, and courage, growing richer with each passing day.